Hi, and welcome to the Making the Media podcast. I'm your host for the show, Craig Wilson, and it's great to have you join us. In this edition of the podcast, we're going to focus a bit more on studio workflows with the executive director of the UK-based news channel TalkTV, Erron Gordon. TalkTV only launched a few months ago, with a headline show presented by the broadcaster and journalist Piers. Erron was heavily involved in the launch and directs Piers' evening show. Erron has an extensive background in television and confesses to being a TV nerd, fascinated by the way it works and how it looks. In his career, he's seen technology evolve to change the way shows are produced and presented, and how the audience interacts, regardless of the platform on which they are watching. So let's hear from him now, and I began by asking him to outline what his current role entails.
So initially, I was brought in to help launch this new News and Views channel on behalf of News UK, and that was, creating the look for the channel, the audio, the sound for the channel, the on-screen graphics, and the set design. And a lot of my efforts went into launching Piers Uncensored, which is the sort of flagship program on the channel, but it also is a global program. It's broadcast on Fox's successful streaming service, Fox Nation, in the United States, and it's also broadcast on Sky News Australia as well. So it was a busy time, but a lot of things to juggle. But nowadays it's more day-to-day directing. So I direct Piers Morgan's show every weeknight, and as well as that, we're kind of managing our studio teams, making sure that we're running, because we run quite a number of studios, and we've got several directors and vision mixers, and it's quite a big team actually, because we've got two studios at London Bridge, and then a studio here at Ealing Broadcast Centre as well, which is the Timeline facility.
So Erron, how did you get into directing to start with?
So I was a floor manager at ITN many years ago, and the actual title of the role was junior studio producer. And that was because, as well as floor managing the main news bulletins on Channel 5 News, you would also TD, so you would technical direct, vision mix direct, the news updates, the 5 news updates. So I started, believe it or not, sort of directing, but not in the true sense. It was running a 1.5-minute news bulletin at like the age of sort of 18, 19. So that was my kind of, and then I got a shot at directing the Saturday morning breakfast show that Channel 5 used to do, 5 News Early, which was fun. It was and I had no idea what I was doing. I really didn't, but it was an amazing opportunity. And it was that was my first kind of foot in the door of directing. But then I went into vision mixing. I got a job at Sky News, vision mix there, and then became a vision mixer at GMTV. Back in 2001, I think. I was there for about 3 years, vision mixing GMTV, then went back to Sky when they got the 5 News contract to make the news bulletins for Channel 5, and I was vision mixing there, and then once again started directing the kind of the weekend programs and the evening news bulletins, things like that. And then I became a kind of fully fledged director on Sky News, I think 2007, I think it was, and that was when I started directing full time. And then from then moved back to GMTV to direct that, and then was at ITV from that period onwards, from sort of 2008 to about this time last year.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating how people's careers develop and, careers change. I'm sure there's a lot of people I speak to who could never have really imagined they'd be in the kind of position they're in now, when they look back at where they began.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's the really exciting thing about television, and the industry. I love this industry. I think it's a really great place. I'm really fortunate to be doing a job that I absolutely love, and I've had some amazing opportunities. I'm coming up to 25 years in television next month, and I started when I was 16, and I was given an amazing opportunity by Chris Shaw at ITN, who was the editor of 5 News back then, and I was just a weekend runner. I was, T-boy, photocopying scripts, that sort of thing. But a lot of the people that I've worked with in those early days are now really senior people. The people that were kind of news editors and program editors back then are now industry leaders. So I've just been really lucky. And I think the other exciting thing when I joined the industry to where it is now is how technology has changed. And I think when I was at 5 News at ITN in the late 90s, it was, we didn't have a lot of, there weren't automated control rooms, there weren't, robotic cameras. And I'm sure they existed elsewhere perhaps, but they didn't there. And that enabled me to kind of pick up more skills. So, I was just this annoying 16-year-old that was just saying, "Oh, can I do that? And can I do that?" And I ended up doing really random things like writing the weather bulletin, and things like that. It was just, odd things like that, because I didn't really know what I wanted to do back then. I used to work on the news desk and do assignments and things like that. But all of that has helped because I understand more now in the position I'm in. When it's quite handy to have had a sort of dip my toe into all those different fields, different areas of the industry, because I kind of have a bit more of a broader understanding of it.
It's definitely about taking the opportunities that come along and I guess are placed in front of you. So let's maybe talk about launching the show and launching the channel. It was a big thing just a few months ago. So really what I'm interested in is, what happens when someone approaches you and says, we've got this position, want you to do it. We want you to launch the show. It's a big name, obviously with Piers Morgan. So really, where do you start with something like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, interestingly, it was Piers himself that reached out. And Piers and I worked really closely together at Good Morning Britain, and we worked there for a number of years until he left, which I'm sure everyone was aware of or is aware of. And I was really happy at Good Morning Britain, really enjoyed my time at ITV. But I mean, one of the things that was probably getting to me after 13 years was probably the 2:00 in the morning alarm call. So when Piers reached out and said, I'd love, I'm launching a new show. It's going to be, very exciting, new opportunity. It's not going to be easy because we were building from the ground up. But I'd really like you to get involved, and not just that. I want you to kind of be involved with the channel. And it sounded like a really exciting opportunity. And it's a huge risk leaving the kind of security of a job and a role at ITV, the biggest commercial broadcaster, making flagship morning show for ITV for a huge network. And you're kind of stepping into a world that is very different. And you're having to build your team and build and create new looks. But because I'm this kind of huge TV nerd, like I literally get my kicks by watching other news programs. I mean, it's really sad, but I enjoy it, so whatever. I'll spend an evening on YouTube watching the new look RTL or something like that. They just launched a new studio. To me, that's I find that interesting, which I probably need to get out more. But actually, that's what I think makes me good at my job, is that I kind of look at all those things, and it creates new ideas, things like that. So yeah, that's kind of that helps with the challenge. But it was a big challenge. It still is a big challenge because we've only been on air for a few months. I mean, and it's tough launching a new channel and finding an audience, and also in this new we're in a multi-platform world. Unless you're BBC or BBC One or ITV or one of the mainstream broadcasters, it's hard finding a new audience. So you're kind of what our offering is, and one of the things that we're very keen to do here is it's multi-platform. It's, if you don't watch the full hour-long show, that's fine. But actually, a lot of our YouTube channel is doing great numbers for Piers' show, and all the clips that are generated from across the network get really good pickup on TikTok and things like that, and YouTube. So these kind of platforms that are finding new audiences that just aren't watching traditional linear television.
That's actually something I wanted to ask a little bit about because, we do talk to a lot of people on the podcast about, multi-platform distribution, the rise of, TikTok and Instagram and other ways that news is distributed. But, I'm still interested, and I think there's still a huge appetite across all these platforms for well-produced studio programs. And I think at times people maybe ignore that, and they think a little bit more that it's just about getting content out to these people. So I'm interested in what you think about how the show is crafted, and is that done really with other platforms in mind, or are you just focused on the TV show?
Yeah, look, I'm a TV person, so first and foremost, I want to make a really good-looking television program, and I think that we have achieved that here, and I'm really proud of what my team and I have done, and actually, we were just nominated. Our ident music was just nominated for an award for for original sound design, and so those things are really, I think, they're hugely important. But of course, you are thinking about the other platforms, and you're thinking about the size of the one of the things that we were thinking about in our banners, our on-screen banners, is the size of the text on screen. A lot of networks now are kind of doing much smaller typeface and not bold, big, it's looking a little bit more conservative. And one of the things that I wanted to do here is just make a much sort of louder, bigger, arguably tabloid in some respects look. And I think that's because when people are watching on their mobile device, it's easier to read.
So when it comes to creating the look, you mentioned earlier watching that new RTL show. What are you looking at, to try to find inspiration?
Yeah, I am, and I just because even if it doesn't even if I don't get inspiration from it, I mean, I'll look at really old stuff as well. I'll go down looking at. I mean, honestly, it's very probably niche, the sort of random old TV clips and things that I look at. But I love it because I think it does inspire me. Theme music, set design, on-screen graphics. Especially whilst working at Good Morning Britain, and when we launched Good Morning Britain, a lot of our inspiration was from the American morning shows. And the same thing with Piers' show. Now, Piers' show is very glossy. It's people will say it's American. It's arguably very American in its design, but when people say it's American, they said that about Good Morning Britain. Actually, to me, it's not American. It's just well done. And I think US television news, particularly, does a brilliant job at making sort of news output, adding in some of those entertainment, high production values that you would see on shiny floor shows like Strictly or Britain's Got Talent, things like that. And you're pumping those into news and current affairs, because just because it's news doesn't mean that it's boring. And that kind of goes way back to when I first started in 1997 at Channel 5 News, which was this really innovative news program presented by Kirsty Young. She was perched on a desk. She was walking around the newsroom, and the newsroom was the studio. So if she was talking to the political editor, she'd walk to his desk and talk about politics. And so I think that has always stuck with me, being a sort of child of or a student of 5 News circa 97 is what sort of made me such a nerd today, because TV news shouldn't be boring. It should be engaging and interesting, and even more so with people making their own kind of news channels on YouTube and things like that. People are doing their own things. There's so many options these days to choose from. You've really got to stand out, and I think that what we've done with the look of TalkTV and Piers Morgan Uncensored is that it's eye-catching, it's bold, it's loud, and hopefully it does stand out in a crowded market.
Ultimately, of course, it is really the content of the show that is key to everything else. But you talked a little about your background and interest in technology and in news. So what kind of innovations do you think have also maybe helped articulate those stories better?
I think the biggest tech innovation, I'm a bit, I love technology. I'm not an under the bonnet guy. So even when I was a vision mixer, I was very much more about the look, the piecing it together rather than the programming and the engineering. I leave that to kind of the experts, because that's never been my sort of field of expertise. But I think the biggest technological innovation that I can pinpoint off the top of my head right now is live view. And I think live view has just changed how we make television programs. Before, jacking a live up at a location took quite a lot of effort, links truck and all that, so much involved in it. Now you turn up with a backpack and you're off, and you get to places that you would never have got to with that. You've got that freedom to move around, which is incredible, not being tied down to one spot. So when it comes to breaking news and things like that, I think that for me is one of the biggest innovations that I can think of in my time anyway. I mean, apart from the obvious ones like moving away from, when I first started at ITN, we had Betacam and there was a, we called it Stack, but essentially it was Betacart machine. But you've moved from that to digital and things, so, it's those are the obvious ones.
One of the things about an organisation like TalkTV, I guess, is it's relatively small in comparison to obviously what you've done at GMB as part of ITV. Does that maybe allow you more freedom to perhaps innovate and do things quicker?
Yeah, it does. And that's one of the really exciting things about being on in this new role, coming from a bigger organisation like ITV, is that, it is a smaller organisation. Obviously, TalkTV is part of News UK, which is part of News Corp, which is a hugely successful, massive organisation. So we've got a great backing from all of our leaders and managers across in the United States and here in London as well. But TalkTV particularly is a small operation, but there's less red tape. So we're launching new programs at the moment, and as kind of part of my role as creative director as well, is that I can say to a graphic designer, this is what I want, this is the brief, off you go, make it happen. And when they start presenting their work, we as a team evaluate the work, we show it to exec producers, things like that. But ultimately it comes down to whether I like it. Which is really quite unique, really. And but that's amazing for me as a TV nerd, because I get to basically create looks. I don't design, obviously, but working with really talented people, we create, we cut through the kind of the red tape and just do what we want and what we think is right. I'm surrounded by people that just love television, and that's what makes it so exciting.
So obviously we've been through in the UK a fairly extraordinary few weeks with the death of the Queen, and that's really what I wanted to talk a little bit about. Being in the gallery, being in the control room when things happen. Clearly shows are produced, they're prepared, but of course one of the great things about news is times change, things change, and the running order changes. So really, I think that's what makes television really exciting. So I'm interested in, maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the experiences around handling the area around the Queen's death, and perhaps reflecting on, I guess, which is probably one of the biggest stories of your career.
No, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, I prefer it when the running order is thrown out. That's my type of telly. That's why I really love doing news, because you get your kind of straight laced days where you follow the running order, but actually when it's thrown out the window and you're having to think, and I learned a lot of those skills directing Sky News. The interesting thing about the Queen's death, and all of the rehearsals, we used to have regular rehearsals for Operation London Bridge at ITV, and before that ITN and Sky. The difference between the Queen's death and a regular breaking story, I've covered huge breaking stories, Grenfell, Brussels terror attack. I wasn't on air at the time, but I was working at Sky News during 9/11. I was at Channel 5 News during the July 7th terror attacks in London. But the difference between those stories and the Queen's death is those are breaking stories. You get that on air immediately, but you get it, and you report as the information's coming in. With the Queen, the way I was always taught is you don't treat it as a breaking story. You get it right. You go on air once you've got the facts. So it's not about being first. It's about accuracy. It's about being right. And and that's what we did. And we were well prepped. And one of again, can't quite believe we did it, because we've only been on air for a few months. But on the actual evening in the gallery, I was there with Piers Morgan. It was very textbook Queen's death announcement. So it was I'm Piers Morgan in London. This is the announcement. Fade to black. Run the national anthem. Fade to black again. Come back in vision. Repeat the announcement, and then go into an obituary VT, which is how I'd always been taught that you should break the news. And the team that I work with here, really experienced editorial team that have worked at big broadcasters, that's how they knew to do it as well. And so I'm, incredibly proud of the way we handled that for a channel that has only been on air for a matter of months. And I think that's a real testament to the talent and the skills of the people that we have here. We may be a very small startup outfit, but actually we have some really good and smart, talented journalists and production staff that make it happen behind the scenes.
You've mentioned that you've worked with Piers Morgan for quite a long time. I'm guessing there's probably never a dull moment.
No. There isn't a dull moment. There were never. I first met Piers, I can't remember, I think it was the end of 2015, where he came and guest hosted Good Morning Britain for a week. And I'd never worked with him before. I didn't know him at all. And I was like, this guy's really interesting. He's very different. Bringing something very different to the table. And then obviously when Piers was brought back, I can't remember the actual timeline of it, but I think it was early the following year. He was brought back to kind of anchor the show with Susanna Reid, and it's been a roller coaster ever since. And actually, I loved Piers and Susanna on screen together, and the ensemble cast of Charlotte Hawkins and Ranveer Singh, Richard Arnold, Kate Garraway. They were an amazing team of presenters, and created, I think, a brilliant morning show. Really, different morning show. And the thing I used to love about that was it was kind of, I always thought of Good Morning Britain as kind of Sky News meets The Big Breakfast. That's what it was always for me. It needed to be different from BBC Breakfast. But Piers was just non-stop fun and craziness, and challenging and pushing me, and sometimes pushing me on air and actually name checking me if something didn't work, and things like that. But we went and I directed, his interviews with Donald Trump, President Trump, in Davos, Switzerland, and on Air Force One. Incredible moments for me as a director. So I'm very grateful to him for all of those opportunities. And then obviously the morning, I think it was March 2021, Piers all blew up with the Meghan Markle stuff on Good Morning Britain. That was a really different day to be directing. It's quite a I've never had a presenter walk off set in the middle of directing a program. And people often don't remember it. Piers actually did come back on set and present the rest of that day's program, which turned out to be his last program. And so he left in this kind of bombastic way that is typical of Piers. And then working with him here as well, it's been a huge challenge, but it's been really exciting. Piers is so invested in what he's doing. He really cares. He cares for the team, and he really wants it to work. And it's important. We want it to work. It's a huge challenge for all of us, and that's why we took the challenge in the first place. But yeah, he pushes you because he's a smart guy. He's been an editor of a national newspaper. He's been a huge name on American entertainment television, big CNN show. He's been there, he's done that, he understands it. He doesn't suffer fools, but that ultimately just makes you stronger and better at your job, I think.
Yeah, being challenged and I think responding to those challenges is one of the things that then drives you on, as a career person, as well as something that's really interesting and stimulating that as well. So perhaps as we get towards the end of the podcast, what are you looking now for the next kind of innovation? What are you seeing that you think, yeah, this looks really good, this can perhaps help us drive things forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, regretfully, I wasn't out at IBC this year, but I always sort of think about those events as exhibitions as a good way to sort of think, well, what's the next innovation in broadcasting, and where do we take it? And we do have to start thinking more about the non-linear platform. TV is changing a lot, and in another 10 years time it will be very different to what I know and what I was taught, and I'll become one of the old guard, and I'll be the people that I first met when I first started in TV. But it's important to sort of keep up with the latest innovations in terms of what we're doing in studios, and particularly things like on-screen graphics and things like that, and information, how you tie information into on-screen graphics. Things like if you're writing a breaking news strap that goes on the television, pushing that out as a mobile phone notification and things like that, which I know some of our rivals do. Those sorts of innovations interest me, because I think you've got to start thinking about the product as not just a television product. You've got to think about it, on every different platform. So off the top of my head, I can't think of a piece of equipment or something that is in mind at the moment. But I just think at the forefront of everything that I do and that we do is thinking that this is not just a television program. How will this look if it was clipped up on TikTok or as a tweet? That's all really important as well. So yeah, there's not one sort of piece of equipment, I would say, but it's just thinking about the future of broadcasting.
So, Erron, you spent many years in breakfast television, where, of course, you were up very, very early. You've now moved on to maybe a few more regular hours. But, there is one final question I ask everyone in the podcast. So, what is it, if anything, that keeps you up at night?
I actually sleep really well at night, Craig, to be honest. What keeps me up? Nothing really keeps me up at night. It depends what sort of period we're in. We're in a busy period at the moment. We're launching new shows with Vanessa Feltz and Jeremy Kyle, and a lot of those things I'm thinking, gosh, have we actually done that, or has that graphic been made? There's so many components to what we do. So if anything, I'll wake up in the middle of the night, and I actually did this week, and just thought, oh gosh, I must email that person to make sure they're aware. It's things. And again, this goes back to being part of a smaller sort of startup organization. It's that, we're talking about scheduling. Have we spoken to the scheduling team and told them that we're doing this or that we're doing that? So generally I sleep quite well. But every now and again, I'll just wake up and sort of think of random things and jot them down on my phone and kind of go back to sleep.
It's good to know after all these years of breakfast TV that Erron is enjoying a good night's rest these days. Thanks to him for sharing his views with us. What do you think? Let us know by email. We are makingthemedia@avid.com, or on social. I am Craig AW1969 on both Twitter and Instagram. You can, of course, also follow any of the Avid social accounts too. Also, check out the show notes, where you can find another podcast with John Mason, the head of programme output for STV in Scotland, where he discusses his passion for live news. You can also find information there about Avid Maestro Graphics, now available as a software-only subscription. Now, talking of subscriptions, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast to get notified when new episodes are out. We are on all the major podcast platforms. That's all for this episode. I hoped you enjoyed hearing Erron's thoughts. I know I certainly did. Thanks as always to the production team behind the show, producer Matt Diggs. Thanks to Erron for joining us, and thanks of course to you for listening. Join me, Craig Wilson, next time for more behind the scenes chat with the people making the media.